This presentation is for the students of semester 3 on general English. This is MD.JALEEL, Assistant Professor of English, Department of English, Tara Government College, Sangareddy, and we have been in unit number 2 since our last presentations. Unit number 2 has been divided into 4 sections. Among them, the first section is a poem, Punishment in Kindergarten, written by Kamala Das. And the second section is a prose piece of writing, Toasted English, written by R.K. Narayan. When R.K. Narayan was visiting the USA as a visiting professor in one of the American universities, he observed how Americans have toasted English. So these observations were presented in his prose piece of writing, Toasted English, which is a part of his collection of essays titled The Reluctant Guru, which is published in 1970. So after completing that prose piece of writing, we move to the vocabulary section. Vocabulary section, we have British and American English, how these two Englishes differ with each other, and how they are used, the vocabulary differs in these two languages is presented in that section. And after that, next we move to the last section, the fourth section in unit number 2, that is grammar. In this section, grammar, we have the topic titled voice. And in our last presentation, previous presentation, we began the presentation on voice, and so part 1 of voice was completed in the previous presentation, in which we saw the uses of active voice. So in our today's presentation, we move to the second part in this grammar section, voice 2. So we try to cover the important features of voice 2. In his prose piece of writing, R.K. Narayan presented that Americans have freed the language from the tyranny of passive voice. So the language can be presented in 2 voices. One is active voice and the another one is passive voice. Nearly 80 to 90% of our expressions are in active voice, but sometimes we use some sentences in passive voice. So what are the differences between these 2 voices, and when to use active voice and when to use passive voice? We try to see in our presentation. In previous presentation, majorly we focused on active voice, the situations, the occasions that we use active voice, and grammatically what are the rules that constitute in active voice. These things were completed in our previous presentation. So in our today's presentation, we try to focus on passive voice. So before entering into passive voice, just we try to rewind the salient features that we have completed in our previous presentation. If you see the first sentence mentioned in the slide, it says Americans prefer toasted English. The people of America, they like toasted English. By seeing this sentence, we can say that this sentence is in active voice. How can we say? Because this sentence can be divided into three parts. The first one is Americans, the second one is prefer, the third one is toasted English. The word prefer in this sentence is a verb because prefer is related to the action, some action. So if we see the verb prefer, the next question is who prefer? Then the answer is Americans. So here Americans are the doer of the action. They are doing the action. Who are preferring? The Americans are preferring. So they can be called as the subject in the sentence. The next question is, okay, Americans prefer what? They prefer toasted English. So the verb prefer is doing some action on the word, on the words toasted English. So toasted English is the object in the sentence. So if we observe this sentence, prefer is the verb and the Americans, the subject, are the doers of the action and they are doing the action on toasted English, which is the object of the sentence. So here toasted English is the receiver of the action because something is done on it. And the people who are doing on it is Americans. So in this way, in the sentence, the subject Americans is doing something. So this sentence can be called as an active sentence. So it is in active voice. So active voice is nothing but if the doer of the action is or are the subject of the sentence, then those sentences are called as active sentence. If we see the next sentence, toasted English is preferred by Americans. Here, what is the verb? Is preferred is the verb. But who are preferring? The Americans. Americans. But what is the position of Americans? The doer of the action. The doer of the action are Americans. But what is their position? They are in the object position. And what they are doing the action? Toasted English. So what is the position of the words toasted English? They are in the position of subject. So here the subject toasted English is passive. Actually it is receiving the action. Here the subject is not active. The subject is passive. Toasted English is passive because something is done to it. Some action is taking place on it. It is passive because it allows something to be done. So when the subject is passive, when the subject is the receiver of the action, or when some action is done to it on the subject, then these sentences are called as passive voice sentences. So in this way, we can understand the difference between active voice and passive voice. So in active voice, the subjects do something. In passive voice, the subjects are passive because they are receiver of the action. So in this way, we can differentiate active voice to passive voice. And this is a small chart equation given to understand active voice and passive voice. In English grammar, voice describes the relationship between the verb and the subject. So basically, voice duty is to tell the relationship between the verb and the subject. So the verb, the relationship of the verb with the subject, whether the subject is doer of the action or whether the subject is the receiver of the action, whether the subject is the active or whether the subject is passive. That is the duty of voice that it tells to us in the sentence. For example, if you see, if the subject is the doer of the action, the subject is doing some action, then those sentences, all those sentences come under the category of active voice. But the subject is not the doer of the action, but it is the receiver of the action. Something is done to it. Then these kind of sentences are called as passive sentences. And we try to understand this concept more uh, clearly by seeing this example. For example, look at this sentence. Rishi ate the man. So what is the verb in the sentence? Ate. Because the action is ate. The work that happened in the sentence is, that is the verb. Who is doing this action? Who is the doer of the action? Rishi. And what is his position? He is the subject. So Rishi is the doer of the action. He is doing the action, and he is doing the action of eating, ate. And then what he is doing the action? What he is eating? He is eating the mango. So the action is taking place on the mango. So it is the object. If we see the arrangement of the sentence, the doer of the action, Rishi, is in the position of subject. And the receiver of the action, the action is ate, and the receiver of the action is the mango. Its position is object. It is in the position of object. So when the subject, the doer of action position is in subject position, is the doer of the action. So the first sentence is in active voice. But if we want to change this sentence into passive voice, the mango, the object, comes into the position of subject, the mango. What happened to mango? Was eaten. By whom? By Rishi. So if we observe this sentence, was eaten is the verb, and on what the verb is, the action is done. This action is done on the mango. So here the mango is the receiver of the action. Something is happening on it. And who done it? Rishi has done it. But the arrangement of the sentence, the receiver of the action here on which the action is done, the mango, is in the position of subject. So here the mango is the subject of the sentence and it is the receiver of the action. So this sentence is in passive. So in this way, if the doer of the action is in the subject position, those sentences are called as active voice. And if the receiver of the action on which the action is done are in the position of the subject, they are called, those sentences, that kind of sentence are called as in passive voice. So in the first sentence, Rishi ate the mango is in active voice, whereas the mango was eaten by Rishi is in passive voice. But majorly in our language, when we use English language, when we adapt to English language, when we express, we speak or we write English language, we generally use 80 to 90% of sentences in active voice because they directly tell about the subject, the doer of the action. Whereas some 10 to 20% of sentences are used in passive voice. But Arkenarayan, in his article, in his essay, he tells us that Americans, they use more active voice, whereas the Britishers, in their language, in their English, they use more passive voice. So in this way, Americans freed the language. He said the sentence, he told the sentence to us that Americans have freed the language from the tyranny, the dictatorship, the oppression of passive voice. So more and more active voice is used in American English, whereas considerable traces of using passive voice can be observed in British English. So in our last presentation, we saw on the rules that constitute active voice. So in our today's presentation, we try to focus on passive voice. Basically, passive voice is mostly used in scientific and official writings because in scientific studies, in scientific presentations, in scientific writings, the experiment results are more important than the doer. Of course, sometimes the scientist, the person who conduct the experiments are also important. But sometimes the result, what happened in the experiments, what is the outcome, these things are very important. So to note all these things, the scientists in their scientific experiments, they tend to use more passive voice than active voice because the object, the outcome is important. And the next thing is that in official writings, when people write official language, official formal writing, in that condition, in that situation also, the result, the outcome, the final thing is more important than the doer of the action because the object of uh, the result, the process, the method is more important than the doer of the action. So in these conditions, generally we can use more passive voice because here the agent is not important. The doer of the action is not important, and that is unimportant. That is implied. That can be understood. And whoever the doer of the action is there, it does not matter. So in that cases, uh, the object, the receiver of the action is more important. So in such occasions, we use passive voice. So basically, passive voice is more used in scientific writings, in scientific expressions, as well as in official writings. We try to understand passive voice by seeing these three examples. Look at the first example. The youngsters were arrested yesterday for rash driving. So in the sentence, the youngsters, two or three, were arrested yesterday. Why? Because of rash driving. We know that by seeing the sentence that actually the action of arrest, the verb here is were arrested. This action, the doer of the action done by somebody else. But this action was done on the youngsters. Usually we know that it is the police who arrest the people. So arrested. So who did this action arrest? The police. Every one of us know the action arrest will be done by the police, is done by the police. So here it is not important to tell that the action, the doer of the action. So it is not important to mention the doer of the action because there is no need to state it. There is no need to tell it that this action is done by the police. The agent here is applied. The doer of the action here is applied. It is understood by everyone that. So the important thing is here is who were arrested. The youngsters were arrested. Those are important. That is the important thing here. So they have become the subject of the sentence. So where the doer of the action is not important, or whether the doer of the action are implied, it is known to everyone. There is no need to mention specifically. In those conditions, we can use passive voice. So this sentence is in passive voice because the receiver of the action are in the position of the subject. And look at the second sentence, sentence number 2. It is said that there is life on the moon. So it is said that there is life on the moon. Exactly, actually, it is said, somebody said what? There is a possibility of life on the moon. But exactly, it is not important who said this statement. Who said? Generally, it is said. Many people may say. In different occasions, many people may say it. So who said it is not important. So the doer of the action is not important. but what they said is important here. So, so it is very difficult. Sometimes it is difficult. Who said there is life on the moon? We cannot determine, but it is just a common belief. Many people may say that it's a belief. It is said, generally said, that there is a life on the moon. So when the doer of the action in the sentence, the persons who said this thing is not important, but what they said is important. So in this condition, in this occasion, in these kind of occasions also, we can use passive voice. This sentence is also in the passive voice. And look at the third sentence. The last date for submission of forms has been extended by a week. So what happened in the sentence? What type of action taken place in the sentence? The last date has been extended. So the last date is given an extension. So who extended? Somebody by a week. So the extension is given for a week. By who did it? This action is done by somebody, but that is irrelevant. So the authorities, the board, somebody who are responsible position in that context, or might have extended that, but they are not important here. The important thing is the last date of submission is more important here. So obviously the authority extends it and they are not important. There is no need to mention it separately. So in these conditions, we use passive voice. So what is extended is more important than who has extended. So in these conditions, we use passive voice. So passive voice is used generally where the doer of the action, the can be called as the agent, is not important or is understood by everyone who did it, or it is uh, it is done by someone which is no need to be mentioned. So in these occasions, we use passive voice. And also there are some usage, that there is some usage related to passive voice. So where we have to use passive voice, and where in the same way where we have not to be used passive voice. In some special conditions, there we are not supposed to use passive voice. We cannot use passive voice. So first we see where passive voice cannot be used. Next we try to move where passive voice can be used. These are the two occasions, two situations where we cannot use passive voice. What is the first one? The first one is that if the sentence has an intransitive verb, if in the sentence the verb is an intransitive one, we cannot use passive voice. It is not possible for us to use passive voice. So first we try to understand what is an intransitive verb. Intransitive verb is a verb that does not take an object, does not have an object. For example, that verb, it does not take an object. There is no need to be having an object. There will be no object. So they, in those conditions, we cannot use passive voice. For example, look at this sentence. The baby was sleeping. So what is the verb in the sentence? Was sleeping is the verb. Who is doing this action? Was sleeping? The baby. So who is the doer of the action? The baby. On what the baby was doing the action? On what was sleeping taking place? Nothing. The baby was sleeping. That's it. There is no need of having object in the sentence. For example, if we say a sentence, he gave a book. The verb is gave. Who did it? Who gave? He. What he gave? A book. So when we put the question what, the verb, where immediately we are getting the answer, the book. So it is a transitive verb because it definitely takes an object. So the verbs which take an object or transitive verbs, and the verbs which do not take verbs are intransitive verbs. Like in the first sentence, the baby was sleeping, sleeping or was sleeping, sleeping on what? No, nothing. There is no need of having an object. So this kind of verbs, we cannot change them into passive voice. So there, in such cases, we cannot use passive voice. So we cannot use passive voice in those sentences. Which sentences have intransitive verbs? What are intransitive verbs? Which does not take an object or intransitive verbs. And the second occasion is the object is a clause. Sometimes the object, after the subject, the verb, the remaining part of the verb is a clause. Then we don't have any direct or indirect object in those sentences, so that we cannot make passive voice. We cannot create passive voice from this kind of sentence. For example, look at this example. They wanted us to stay another week. So what is the action? One verb, wanted. Who wanted? They wanted. So the action or the doer of the action, the subject, the agent in the sentence is they. So wanted on what? We don't have any object, but the clause is that they wanted what means us to stay another week. So just it's a clause. It does not have any clear direct or indirect object. So in this such occasions, we cannot use passive voice. So in this way, passive voice cannot be used with the sentences which have intransitive verbs. And in the second occasions, when the object of the sentence is a clause, then we cannot use passive voice. And in two in one more occasion also we cannot use passive voice. Passive voice is generally not used if the sentence is an interrogative. If the given sentence is an interrogative sentence, we cannot use passive voice generally. Of course, if we want to convert it into passive voice, we can do it. But generally, we cannot use such sentences in passive voice. For example, interrogative sentence is a question. Basically, it is a question. Interrogative sentences are questions. When we are asking something, we can directly ask them, but we cannot use passive voice in such occasions. For example, look at this example. Who taught you English? So in this sentence, we are asking directly, who is the person who taught you English? I think that will be fine. We can get a direct answer, the name, the person, the details of the person who taught that person English. But if we use this, convert this interrogative sentence, this question into passive voice, it seems it is like this. By whom were you taught English? By whom were you taught English? So you were taught English by whom? So this sentence looks a little bit awkward. It is unnatural, inconvenient for the speaker as well as for the listener to answer. So in such occasions, when we are using interrogative sentences, the sentences in questions, then we are not supposed to use passive voice. Generally, the passive voice is used when the doer of the action, the agent, is unknown. If who did it, we do not know, then there is no need to tell the doer of the action in the sentence. So when the agent or the doer of the action is unknown, it is not known. And sometimes this doer of the action is irrelevant. There is no need to mention that doer of the action. And sometimes when this doer of the action is implied, it can be understood by everyone. So in these three occasions, we use passive voice because there the doer of the action is not important, it is unimportant. So then we use passive voice. For example, try to understand, see these three sentences. The Indian team has been announced. Actually, the verb in the sentence is announced. Who did this action? Who announced? Somebody, some board, some people. But the announced people who did the action are not important in the sentence. But the important thing is what happened. The Indian team that is announced, that has been announced. So here the receiver of the action are important. So the who made that announcement are irrelevant. They are not important. So in that occasion we use passive voice. Look at the next sentence. Many countries were affected by the malware. So many countries now were affected by that malware. So that virus in the systems. So here, actually, the doer of the action who affected is malware. But the malware is not important, but what happened, what was the effect? Not only one or two countries, but many countries affected. So the many countries affected is more important than the doer of the who affected the action. In such occasions also we use passive voice. And the third one is the thief has been arrested. So here the action is arrest. Who arrest? It is known to everyone. The police usually naturally the police arrest. So it is implied, it is known to everyone. So who was arrested? The notorious thief, the most wanted thief, or the thief who theft, who stole everything. So the thief has been arrested by the police. So here the implied subject doer of the action is not important to mention. So in this occasion also we use passive voice. So generally passive voice is used in three times: when the doer of the action is unknown, when the doer of the action is irrelevant, not need to be mentioned, and when the doer of the action is implied, it is known to everyone, then we use passive voice. And we also use passive voice when the action or the receiver of the action is more important than the doer. So when in that sentence, we want to give more prominence, more important to the receiver or the action, then we use the sentences in passive voice. For example, look at this sentence. The tour will be conducted by the sports department. Actually, the verb is here conducted. That action is taking place. Who are conducting? The sports department. But here the importance is not given who are conducting, but what is conducted. The tour will be conducted. It will be conducted. The tour, the importance, prominence given is given to the tour on the receiver of the action. And in the next sentence, she always gets praised by her teachers. Actually, praised. She gets praised. Who? She. But who are praising? Who are doing that action? Her teachers. Teachers are doing that action praise. But here the teachers are not more important than that girl who is getting the praise. So here the more importance, more prominence, our intention is to focus the person who is who is getting the praise. So in this such occasions, we use passive voice. And the next sentence is smoking is prohibited. Actually, this action prohibition is done by somebody, but they are not important. Usually who prohibit? The police, the government, the authorities, the society, whatever it may be. But they are not important, but what is prohibited is important. The receiver of the action is important. What is prohibited? Smoking is prohibited. So here our focus is on the receiver, on what the action is taken place. So in these occasions, we use passive voice. So And sometimes we use passive voice when to make the sentence softer and less hostile. Sometimes we want to express, sometimes we want to present some sentences in a softer manner, in a softer way of presentation. Then passive voice helps us. For example, look at these two sentences. The bill has been not paid, and here the bill is the receiver of the action, is not paid by somebody or by you. So you have not paid the bill. Actually, that is the person, you or he or she, not paid the bill. But here, to make the sentence a little bit softer, we are using it in passive voice. But if we use the same sentence in active voice, how can we say, you have not paid this bill? So the doer of the action is the subject of the sentence. But this sentence looks a little bit harsh, hostile comparing to the first sentence, because you have not did this, you have not done this action is not did by you did not pay the bill. So here we are focusing on the person who did not do that action. But in the second sentence, the more focus is given to the bill which is not paid rather than the person who has not paid. So in these occasions, when we want to make things softer in a convincing way, we can use passive voice. And we can also use passive voice to avoid taking the blame. When we want to uh, avoid taking blame, when we do not want to take the blame on us directly, in that occasions also we can use passive voice. For example, in the first sentence it says that a mistake was made, something has happened, a mistake was made. So here uh, made is the verb, on what it is done, a mistake was made. So mistake is a receiver of that. But in the next sentence, if you observe, we made a mistake. Who made the mistake? We. So the first sentence tells that that mistake was done by us. So blame is on us, on we. So instead of taking that blame on us, we can focus more on the what happened instead of who did it. So a mistake was made. It is in passive. So to avoid the blame, we can use passive voice. And look at this sentence. So in this sentence, how to change the sentences in active voice into passive voice with one example. If you see the first sentence, Americans use informal English. This sentence is in active voice because the verb of the sentence is use. Who are the doer of the actions? Americans. They are the doer of the action and they are in the subject position. On what they are using, they are doing this action, informal English. So in active voice, we will have the doer of the action in the subject position, next the verb, and next the object on what the action is done in formal English. To convert formal English to active voice into passive voice, the object of active voice becomes the subject. So the informal English becomes the subject, and its corresponding verb, active verb, becomes the passive verb, is used, because use is in simple present tense. So it becomes is used in simple present passive. And it also takes the preposition by, because who is doing this? This action is done on the receiver by whom? Americans. So Americans becomes the object. So in this way, the object of active voice becomes the subject of passive voice, and the verb changes the correct into its correct corresponding form, and the subject becomes the object. So in this way, we can change a sentence from active voice into passive voice and a sentence in passive voice to active voice. So while making these changes, we have to remember four rules. So we try to see these four rules in our presentation. The first rule is that the active voice object, the object in active voice means the receiver of the action in active voice becomes the subject of the passive voice. So the quality does not change. The receiver is the same receiver of the action, but the receiver of the action is object in active voice, but it becomes the subject of the passive voice. So we convert the object of active voice into the subject of the passive voice. That is the first one. And the second rule that we have to remember is replace active verb to matching passive verb. So when we are converting the sentences of active voice into passive voice, we have to convert, we have to change the active verbs into passive verbs to their corresponding forms. For example, in the previous example, we saw Americans use, the verb use in passive voice became is used in formal English is used. So its corresponding verb, its matching passive verb should be used. That is the second rule. And the third rule is use the preposition before the agent. In passive voice, if we mention the agent, if we mention the doer of the action, then we have to place the preposition by, because this is done by somebody, because in formal English is used by Americans. So who are using? By Americans. So preposition by should be used before the agent. And the last fourth rule is the subject of the active voice, who are the doer of the action, are becoming the object of the passive voice. So the subject of the active voice becomes the object of the passive voice, and whereas the uh, uh, the object of the active voice become the subject of the passive voice. These are the two things that we have to remember. Once again, I repeat: the subject of the active voice becomes the object of the passive voice, and the object of the active voice becomes the subject of the passive voice. And the second rule is that we have to very careful, very cautious when we are changing the form of verb from active voice to passive voice. We have to change its appropriate forms, matching verb form in passive voice. The third one is that if we are mentioning the agent, the doer of the action in the passive voice, we think it is important to mention, or we are mentioning, then we have to put the preposition by before the agent. So by remembering these 4 points, these 4 rules, we can convert sentences into active voice to passive voice and passive voice to active voice. So in our syllabus, we have given 4 exercises on voice. In our next presentation, we try to focus on uh, these exercises. We try to see these exercises. So with that, we can complete the topic voice. So here I conclude my presentation, and I thank everyone for listening this presentation.